Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording this session for a radio broadcast on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Our first section will focus on the problem. What needs do transparency and accountability efforts address? Next, we will discuss solutions that work. And lastly, we'll explore the benefit, increased mission effectiveness. Feel free to post questions and comments during the session, and we'll try to get them answered online. We are particularly pleased to welcome our moderator, Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Radio 1500 AM. Let me turn over the reins to Jason to begin today's discussion.
Welcome to the panel discussion, the CFO Agenda, delivering value from financial transparency and audit efforts in the public and private sector. We have a terrific lineup of guests today. They are Charlie Cook, the Department of Navy's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, James Watkins, the Department of Army's Deputy Assistant Secretary, Doug Bennett, the Department of the Air Force's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Financial Operations, and Joe Quinn, a Senior Manager in the Advisory Services Practice of Ernst & Young. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Before we get started, let me set some context to our discussion. Then each of our panelists will do about 2 or 3 minutes of where their service is at in meeting the all-important audit readiness deadlines. Two dates really are etched in the panelists' minds, I'm sure, if not hundreds or hundreds of thousands of others across the Defense Department. September 30th, 2014 and 2017. Those are the 2 dates by which DoD and all of its services and agencies must first achieve audit readiness of the Statement of Budgetary Resources, or SBR. We're going to hear that term a lot during this discussion, I'm sure. The second is 2017. That's when they must achieve full audit readiness. And DoD is mobilizing to reach both of these goals the only way it can, bringing people, resources, and focus to those efforts. And to be brutally honest, as you gentlemen well know, it's not going to be easy, and many experts say not even possible. Today we're going to find out how just smart those experts really are. And better yet, what this accomplishment, or at least at the very least, how much better understanding of the spending that DoD is going to get from doing this effort will add to the financial management disciplines and to its processes. DoD's effort actually goes back to 2005 when it first issued the Financial Improvement and Audit Readiness, or FIRE plan. It updated that strategy in 2009, and then in 2011, then Secretary Leon Panetta directed the department to accelerate key elements of the FIRE plan and place greater emphasis on the overall effort. The Secretary's memo also directed DoD components to revise their financial improvement plans to incorporate the accelerated date of 2014 for the Statement of Budgetary Resources. So what's the latest? Well, we know progress is definitely being made. The Marine Corps achieved audit readiness and received a full unqualified opinion in 2012. And DoD officials earlier this year said they expect the 2013 results to be the same. Now, along with the Marines, 9 other DoD agencies made significant progress in 2012, including the Defense Information Systems Agency, the Defense Finance and Accounting Service, and the Defense Contract Audit Agency. Now, as for the Big 3, which we have here today, a March 2014 issue of Audit Readiness News. You guys didn't know I read that every week. I mean, that's my favorite publication, Audit Readiness News, produced by the DoD CFO, says as of February 28th, the Navy is ahead of the pack, completing 7 of 10 milestones to achieve the Statement of Budgetary Resources, while the Army and Air Force have met 3 of 10 milestones. Obviously, they still have a long way to go to September. So with that context in mind, let me just offer one aside to this. I think we should recognize and appreciate the effort, honesty, and really overall focus that Bob Hill has brought to each of these goals. Bob recently retired from DoD as the Senate confirmed Mike McCord as the new Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller and Chief Financial Officer. Mr. McCord has big shoes to fill and is walking into a job that a lot of people are paying attention to, especially those 535 chairmen of the board in Congress. So as DoD gets ready, I think it's a good luck to both gentlemen. So a little bit of history, a little bit of context. Let's begin our discussion. Once again, our panelists are Charlie Cook, the Department of Navy's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Financial Management and Comptroller, James Watkins, the Department of Army's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Audit Readiness, Doug Bennett, the Department of Air Force's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Financial Operations in the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Financial Management and Comptroller, and Joe Quinn, a Senior Manager in the Advisory Services Practice of Ernst & Young. Gentlemen, again, welcome to the show. Let me look to Charlie. Department of Navy is making a lot of progress. Just give us an update, you guys, where you're at with both the SBR deadline and that far off 2017 deadline.
Thank you, Jason. I'd like to note one small difference. While the law says the Statement of Budgetary Resources, based on the Marine Corps experience, the schedule of budgetary activities, which is a smaller portion of the SBR, is what will be asserted and audited. The Navy, Department of Navy, is on track. The Navy will assert before the end of September. We're on schedule to do that, and with our sister services, we'll be under contract. The goal is to be under contract in December. It may slip a little bit, but we will be ready for FY15. On 2017, the Navy has a plan to get there. I would note that the 2017 challenges are more significant. Obviously, we're doing the easy things first. The harder things are towards the back end. So the 2017 date is not without its challenges, mostly evaluation of equipment and accountability, or long poles in the tent on that.
And when you talk about these upcoming deadlines, the September one that you said you're going to be ready for, and then yes, you said you'll be ready for by the end of 2015. What's the differences there?
Again, we will assert audit readiness by the end of this fiscal year, but the audit will actually begin sometime in FY15, and it will be of the FY15 financial statements.
Okay, so not the 14, which was we're now, but
Correct.
The 15. But you have to be ready for that 15 by the end of 14.
Correct.
All right. A lot of numbers. I know it's going to keep track. Let me turn to Jim over at the Army to give us a sense of where you guys are at.
The Army's on track, first of all, and we've got a lot of I just don't say that just to say it, but we have some evidence of that from outside independent sources. Let me give you some examples. We have an independent public accounting firm, KPMG, that's done an audit on our appropriations received, and we have a clean audit opinion on that. We've had annual examinations in 11, 12, and 13, and we just finished exam number 3 conducted by KPMG, and they've noted and identified the significant progress the Army has made over the last 3 years. In addition, we've had the DoDIG looking at certain types of materials, such as operating materials and supplies, in other words, our Army missiles. And the missiles that they looked at, they gave us an unqualified opinion on. And we've had our real property looked at by an IPA. Again, the opinion was that it was a clean opinion for our real property. So they looked at 23 installations, which is about 50% of the Army's real property assets. Those 23 installations make up about the size of the state of Massachusetts. So it gives you an idea of the complexity, because we have about 200 installations in the Army. I would like to also clarify that in the Army's case, we have 12 financial statements that we produce every year. 4 statements are for the general fund, and the same 4 statements are produced for the working capital fund, and the same 4 statements are produced for Army Civil Works. Now, you didn't mention, but the Army's Corps of Engineers, for their 4 statements, they have an unqualified opinion, and they've had an unqualified opinion for years. And the size and scope of their balance sheet and statement of budgetary resources is the biggest one in the Army that's been done, biggest one in Department of Defense, I should say, that's been completed. So that's a real feather in the Corps of Engineers cap. So we have the other 8 statements, and 7 of those are due in 2017, and only the general fund, SBR, and as Charlie pointed out, the abbreviated schedule of budgetary activity, which is a subset of the SBR, is what we'll be asserting to this month. So we're on track, and we have independent verification of that we'll be on track to meet our goals.
And it sounds to me in many ways that what the Army is doing, the path that's going down, is the idea of let's do it not piecemeal, because that always seems to have a bad connotation, but let's get a certain section done, let's move on to the next section. I mean, it's all being worked at once, don't get me wrong, but it seems like where you're seeing there's progress, you want to say, yes, we're definitely making progress. Does that make sense? Is that what I'm getting at?
Well, the Army's approach to auditability is a little bit different than the Navy and the Air Force, only because of where we started. For example, when we talk about enterprise systems, in the past, the Army has done accounting in systems that accounted for appropriations that we report back to Congress. To have financial statement audit, it's a different approach where you have a general ledger, and the Army has not ever had a general ledger until we implemented our enterprise systems. So the general ledger accounting and the financial auditability is a new twist, a new requirement, relatively new. As we celebrate 239 years of our Army this month, it's only been relatively recently that the Congress has imposed, not only do we want you to account for the appropriations, we want you to account for it in a financial statement audit, which is a different twist. Consequently, because we were deploying the enterprise system, a new financial system, we did our audit strategy to follow the deployment of that enterprise system. And we looked across the board at all systems and all controls so that we wouldn't have to go back to do a segment at one installation followed by another team to do another segment at the same installation and be disruptive to the commander, because there are many accessible units within a financial statement.
Right. And I know we're going to touch upon the idea of ERP systems and large systems later in the show. So if I get this acronym right, correct me if I'm wrong, GFIBS, right? Is that the right one?
GFIBS stands for the General Fund Enterprise Business System, and it's a system that has a general ledger, which we've not had before, and it allows us to see the end-to-end process and the effects of a business transaction. Because for every business transaction, there's an associated financial impact. That financial impact is reflected on the general ledger.
All right. We're going to go back to that. Let's turn to Joe Quinn from Ernst & Young. Okay, so you're seeing this from a different perspective. This is not an easy road that the military is going down. From your perspective, what are you seeing both from your clients in DoD, outside of DoD? What's happening more broadly across government?
Well, our clients, Jason, in DoD and DHS and other federal agencies have made incredible progress in really getting towards the ultimate goal of audit readiness, which is providing enhanced decision-making information to leaders, financial information. And that's really presented an opportunity for the CFO community to play a role in addressing a national priority right now. And that's really excited those accountants and auditors and budgeteers like us out there to really get involved and help the nation. We're at a situation right here, as these folks know very well, where discretionary resources are shrinking. If you look in real dollar terms, the $1.2 trillion in the FY15 budget is less than in prior years, and it shrinks even more in the out years. Combine that with the requirements to pay for military health care, military benefits, and other mandatory payments within that bucket of funds, there's a real pressure on the ability to meet mission needs. And those needs aren't decreasing either. There's still the demand from citizens and leaders to make sure that we are providing for the safety of our nation, increasing the performance of our students, refreshing our infrastructure, and other important things. So it's really created a unique situation where, because of these audit readiness efforts, the CFO community can now jump in and help address the problem and try to help leadership make sure that we're getting the most value from our investments. We can provide information to leaders because of the efforts in audit readiness to help them better inform those decisions and get the most value out of each resource investment. I've heard it described in many places. This probably won't be news to anyone, that a lot of the management in DoD and other parts of the federal government has to be based on the experience of the leadership, sometimes even intuition, because of the lack of financial data that's available. So, that really presents an opportunity for us to provide more data, more information on the cost of programs and the performance of programs going forward, to ensure that we can get the most value out of each dollar that we spend.
It's interesting you bring up that what's commonly, I think, called line of sight. I mean, I think that's a huge issue. And one of the things that you see is the Homeland Security Department, which I think you mentioned as achieving that audit readiness, that the unqualified opinion really for the first time as well. And beyond DoD, with all due respect, they were the last holdouts for there's a whole assortment of reasons why. Is that idea of using the data better, which I think we'll address later in the panel as well? I mean, that's the end versus the means. I mean, the means really is getting first that unqualified opinion.
Right. The foundation of accurate and reliable financial accounting information has to be there to be able to develop the further capability to understand what do programs cost and what benefits do programs deliver. Without being able to walk and deliver accurate financial reports and get a clean audit opinion, leaders won't be able to rely on that information you're providing. So that really is the first step and is incredibly important to get to that next level of capability.
And I know several civilian agencies have made that first, walking stage, and now a lot of them are moving into that running stage, which, again, I know DoD has been there in some ways. In other ways, you'll get there in time. Let's turn to Doug Bennett from the Air Force. Doug, Air Force was on the teetering edge, I'll say, and whether or not you'd make that first September deadline and then some of the other deadlines. Mr. Marin, who's your boss, recently testified and said he's much more positive that you guys are going to make it. So tell us where you're at.
Sure, Jason. Thank you. Obviously, we've been putting a lot of effort into audit readiness, making some great strides. One of the big accomplishments that we did over 2 years ago was reconcile our fund balance with Treasury, which sounds like a very simple issue but when you realize that we're identifying at each individual transaction over 1 million transactions each month, it becomes much more complicated. And these disbursements and collections are made by other agencies and across the world. So we've made some great progress there. It's one of the deal breakers in audit readiness. Very proud we've sustained that. We reconcile over 99.99% monthly. We've also gotten clean opinions on military equipment and other assets, other operating material supplies, almost $100 billion worth of mission-critical assets that the Air Force uses on a daily basis. So we've made great progress there, and right now my team is preparing our assertion that we're going to present to our Secretary to validate that we are ready to go to audit in FY15. And as Charlie said, it would be a schedule of budgetary activity. I think this also forms the foundation for 2017, and I know that we talk about that as kind of a separate effort, but I really think it's very closely related to what we're doing right now, because the same end-to-end processes, military pay, that, as an example, that creates an obligation to pay our military, also results in an expense that goes on our statement of net cost, or a payable that's going to show up on our balance sheet. So I think this effort is very complementary, and I see, as Charlie pointed out, valuation being the great difficult piece, but it becomes very isolated after we get these processes done. And as Joe brought up, I see great value in this effort. One, we're getting cleaner data where we can identify issues further down the line and fix it for our airmen, for our vendors, get them paid properly and timely, but also provide our cost estimators with good, accurate information where they can estimate the cost of weapon systems and support. So I see very positive impacts to audit readiness, and I think we're making progress, and we're looking forward to 2015.
All right, I've never heard someone looking forward to 2015, but we'll have that on record. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to the panel discussion, The CFO Agenda, sponsored by Ernst & Young on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com.